Is this your first time playing fantasy football? Don't worry, I got you. So what is fantasy football? Fantasy football is a competition of skill and luck. First off, you and your league mates get together and you select NFL players that will be on your team. This process is called a draft. There are two types of drafts, auctions and snake drafts. A vast majority of you aren't going to play in auctions, so we're really not going to dive too deep into that. It's basically what it sounds like, an auction. You bid on players and that's how you decide your team. But most of you will be in what's called a snake draft. Let me show you. The platform we're using today is called Sleeper. I recommend this one for new users. This is what a draft board looks like. Most fantasy football leagues are either 8 teams, 10 teams, 12 teams, 14 teams, or even 16 teams. The less number of teams, the easier it is for new players. And that's because the more teams there are, the faster the best players are going to be taken. So the reason it's called a snake draft is because the order at which the players are picked looks kind of like a snake. It starts on the left and goes all the way to the end, then down and all the way back. Let me show you. We'll start a mock draft so I can give you an example. Let's say you're lucky enough to get the number 1 pick. That's you right there. So you'll look down here and number 1 overall, I'm going Christian McCaffrey. Don't worry, we'll go into players later. The most important thing is to understand the general concept of how a snake draft works. So once I pick Christian McCaffrey, the next player will get picked. And it'll go on until the end of the row, and then it goes to the next row and comes back over. Now it's your turn to pick. And you'll pick Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Now the snake goes back over. This will keep happening, and then it's your turn to select again. Once you and your league mates have made all your selections in your draft, then you will have what's called a roster. This consists of a starting lineup and a bench. You only get points for the players that are in your starting lineup. So if a player is out or suspended and he's in your starting lineup, after the game starts, you can't take them out. So you're stuck with getting a 0 in that spot. More on that later. So down here is your bench. Your bench are players that are on reserve for your starters. If you think a player on your bench is going to outperform a player in your starting lineup, you can move them from the bench into your starting roster and move your starter into your bench. Your starting roster normally consists of a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex spot. A flex spot is either a wide receiver, running back, or tight end. And then you will have a kicker and a defense. Now that you understand what a roster is, let me explain how scoring works. And I'll give a brief synopsis. If you'd like me to make a video specifically going over how scoring works, let me know down in the comments. But a brief overview is whatever is happening in the NFL for that player, it's what's going to happen for your fantasy team. So if your player has a great week in the NFL, he's probably going to have a great week for you in fantasy football. Unfortunately, it's the same if they play poorly as well. Players get points for a variety of things that happen during the game. Touchdowns, yards, receptions, field goals. Unfortunately, they can also lose points with fumbles and interceptions. So every week, your team will be going up against another one of your league mates. As you can see here, they have the same roster set up as you do. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight end, flex, kicker, and defense. So make sure you start your lineup and pay attention to any players that may be injured. You're going to have to check the news on these players from time to time, especially before they're locked in. If you do happen to have any injuries or a player just isn't living up to your expectations, that's when you use the waiver wire. The waiver wire is where all the players that have not been selected on a roster sit until you need someone. If you need a player, you just head over here to players, and these are all of the available players. The positions are up here, so if you needed a wide receiver, you click this, say, oh, I think Rashee Rice is going to have a fantastic game this week. Let me pick him up. Click the plus, and you exchange him for one of your players. Here, now you add player, and boom, shakalaka. Now you have just made a free agent move, and all of your league mates are jealous that you made it to him before they did. Just to be clear, this was just an example. I repeat, Rashee Rice should not be picked up over Zay Flowers. This was just an example. Normally, players lock after they've played for the week. Once those players are locked, you have to put in what's called a waiver claim. A waiver claim is basically you telling the system that you want the player. And if no one else wants that player, then you get them. But if someone else does want that player, it comes down to waiver order. And the simplest way to explain that is whoever drafted first has the last waiver order, and whoever drafted last in your league has the first waiver order. You can see your waiver order here, starting at 1 and ending at 10. I went first, so I have the last waiver claim. The person that drafted last in the league has the first waiver claim. They do this to try to make it fair for the person who had to draft last, because normally if you draft last, the first player you draft tends to be worse than the first person who drafted in your league. After you or one of your league mates uses your waiver claim, they then go to the bottom of the list. This means that everybody else moves up and has a better chance of winning a waiver claim if 2 people want the same player. So if you're really high in the waiver order, you may want to hold off on using that until you find a player that you really want. Because once you use your waiver claim, you then go to the bottom of the list. So if you're first in the waiver order, you want to make sure you use that on an impact player, one that's really going to help your team. Don't just use it for somebody you're going to add and drop next week. Make sure it's a good choice. Now, if you're at the bottom of the waiver list, then adding and dropping is less significant because you're going to go back to the bottom, but if you're already in the bottom 3, it's really not that big of a deal. If you have more questions on how this works or the best strategy to use during your waivers, just let me know down in the comments and I can make a video for you. This area over here is the league chat, where you can communicate with your league mates on pretty much anything you want to. If you're watching football and something amazing happens, you can let your league mates know here. But if I was very proud that I got Rashee Rice off the waiver wire, if I would have sent a pic of a bear dancing just to let everybody know how happy I am that I got this player, you can do that. And you can actually add comments and somebody can laugh or fire pick or, oh my gosh, I can't believe you got this person. The chat is where you can talk to your league mates about what's going on and communicate. Yes, fantasy football is about winning, but it's also about camaraderie and having fun with your friends and celebrating victories and laughing at their losses. Another way to improve your roster is what's called trading. Let's say that you really need a running back. For some reason, either your running back goes down or he's just not performing as well as you would like him to. But your wide receivers are doing great and you have a bunch that are outperforming expectations. One thing that you can do is trade your wide receiver for someone else's running back. Trades are another fantastic way to improve your roster. What you would do is find a team that needs a wide receiver and offer them your wide receiver for their running back. And if they think that that would help their team and they agree, then your players swap teams, you got better, they got better, it's a win-win. Be careful when you're trading though. If you're watching this video, you're probably new, and if you're new, unfortunately, people might try to take advantage of you. So, consult an expert before you make trades. If you ever have questions on whether or not your trade is good, just send it my way. I'll let you know. If you'd like me to go into that further, just let me know down in the comments. I'll make a video for you. And there's also fun little things in fantasy football, like changing your name and having a cool logo. For example, I have Chris Olave down here, so I can change my name to Olave Garden. Get it? Like Olive Garden? That's a knee slapper. Update the picture, so now my team name is Olave Garden. And I got a picture of Chris Olave. Sometimes you have to appreciate the little things. Fantasy football is a long competition, but all of it happens within the span of the regular season of the NFL. In fantasy football, there are 2 portions. There's a regular season and there's the playoffs. Every week you will be playing against someone else in your league. And if you score more points than them that week, you come out with a victory. This will happen for about 14 weeks. Your win-loss record decides who makes the playoffs. And if there's a tie between 2 people, the person that gets into the playoffs is the person that scored the most points throughout the entire season. That way, the better team gets in. In a 10-person league, normally 4 people make the playoffs. In a 12-person league, normally 6 people make the playoffs. Once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. Whether you have the least wins or most wins, anyone can win in the playoffs. If you have 6 people in the playoffs, there's normally a bye week. A bye week is for the top 2 teams in your league. They played so well that they don't have to play anybody in week 1. If possible, you want that bye week. But even if you don't have it, you can still win the championship. You just have to play 3 rounds, whereas they play 2 rounds. So there's 3 rounds of the playoffs. Round 1, which is like a wild card round. Round 2, which is the semifinals. Round 3 is the finals. This is why we play fantasy football, is to make it to the finals and win it. And with my help, you're gonna be a champion. I recommend every league having a trophy, a belt, a ring, something to signify and let everyone else know that you are the best. That is honestly one of the best parts of fantasy football, is everyone else knowing that they tried their hardest, but they couldn't take you down. Glorious victory. You want this title? You're gonna have to come take it. You may wanna wash it too. There's gonna be some champagne on it.
It's a celebration. Cheers, everyone.
And don't worry, I'll be here all season to help you know who to add, who to drop, who to trade away, and who to trade for. From before your league starts to after you're holding the championship belt, I'll be here. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Mike Williams, Fantasy Bay, at your service. Now that you understand the bare bones of how fantasy football works, I think it's time for you to understand more about the draft. Drafting is like the foundation of your team. Yes, it will change along the way through injuries, waiver claims, and even trades. So you want to set the best foundation for this house you're building, and that's with the draft. So click here for some tips and tricks that will help you dominate your draft and your league. I'll see you soon.